Yeah, good morning from Beirut. We are now exactly a year on from the most to ever hit this city. Hundreds of people killed, thousands wounded, and billions of dollars of damage in a country that was already virtually bankrupt. 12 months on, no one's been charged, nobody's been prosecuted, and some of the politicians that were presiding over that catastrophe last year are effectively still in charge today. So coming up in this special programme, we'll ask what state is Lebanon in now, politically, economically, and perhaps psychologically as well. But let's start off by reminding ourselves what happened a year ago today at 6 in the evening.
It was just after 6 p.m. on Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. After a loud explosion at Beirut's port, these residents began filming what they thought was a simple fire. But the worst was still to come. A second shock felt all the way in northern Israel and Cyprus. In the Lebanese capital, no one was left untouched.
It was a terrifying moment. For 3 minutes, I didn't understand what was happening. I saw blood on my face, but I saw people around me who were far more hurt.
I've already seen frightening things, but nothing like what I saw today. I've never been so scared in my life.
Aerial footage shows the extent of the damage. Destruction which left tens of thousands homeless. The death toll would quickly climb to over 200, with more than 7,000 others injured. Shock quickly turned to anger as the world learned the cause of the blast. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored at a warehouse in the city's port. The highly explosive substance was stocked without proper safety measures, and authorities had known about it for years. In a country already plagued by corruption and economic crisis, the latest scandal was too much to bear.
It's been a while since we had any trust in our government.
All of these incompetent people in charge need to be held accountable. They're guilty of a crime against humanity.
French President Emmanuel Macron visited the city calling for political renewal. The international community pledged nearly $300 million in aid to be distributed directly to the Lebanese people. Faced with growing anger, Prime Minister Hassan Diab resigned but remained on as the head of a caretaker government. Since then, Lebanon has been in political deadlock, and the country's official investigation into the explosion has yet to deliver any conclusions.
Well, that was Delano D'Souza with that report for you there. And I now want to welcome to our special programme today, Karina Sukar. She's an architect here in the city. Karina, thank you for coming on France 24 today. I want you to tell me and our viewers briefly a little bit about your story. What happened to you and your family a year ago today?
Well, we were miraculously saved, just like many of the Lebanese people. I live in Marm Khail, that was the most affected, and my office is in Jemaise. They were all totally destroyed and completely devastated. But I wasn't at the office by miracle, and my daughter was trapped in the elevator between the 15th and 16th floor, where when the bomb exploded and the building was totally in ruins. We had dead people, a dear neighbor who died in front of her children. But I want to tell you something. Actually, we all died on August 4th, all of us. Maybe our dear lost souls, they are in a better place, but we are still living in this hell that was actually promised to us.
And Karina, let me ask you this. We are 1 year on. So far, nobody has been charged. No one has been prosecuted. We don't really know exactly what happened at the port. On this anniversary, how are you feeling today?
I'm disgusted. I'm revolted. I can't even imagine how monstrosity can get to this point. This is our country, and the rulers, the ruling class, is acting as if we were their enemies, as if Lebanon is their enemy, and this is simply simply disgusting and unfair.
And, you know, there are lots of people in Lebanon at the moment of your kind of background perhaps who have chosen to leave the country. Is it something, given everything you've been through, your family's been through, that you might do yourself?
No.
Tell us
No.
why.
I'm staying here. I want to be part of the amazing mass of people who want to heal the wounds of my country, to heal the wounds of Lebanon and have it resurrect again.
So you're hopeful, actually?
Of course I'm hopeful. Without hope, there's no life. Of course, we should all be hopeful.
What's your message today, if you have one, to the Lebanese leaders? You've expressed your frustration, you've expressed your anger. What do you want to tell them today?
I want to quote Gandhi. A dear friend of mine, Alex, sent me a quote by Gandhi that says, "Through all history, there have been tyrants and murderers. For a time, they seem invincible, but in the end, they will fall, and they always fall, always."
All right, Karina Sakar, I want to thank you for coming on to talk to us today. Thank you for your words. Your grief and your anger is extremely clear, and certainly Karina is not the only person who's very angry in Lebanon today. Although a couple of weeks ago, there were protests outside the home of the Interior Minister, Mohammed Fahmy, because he was accused of effectively obstructing justice by preventing an investigation into one of the most senior security figures in the country. Now, our reporters were at that protest. Have a look at what they found.
We're going to storm the minister's house. We have to put an end to impunity. We're not scared of anyone anymore. We're going to go all the way. We're going to go into their houses and we're going to throw them in jail. Just look at how they treat us, the families of the victims, but we'll crush them. We'll throw coffins at this bastard's house so he can sense death and know that both he and his family will die. That it will be his turn just as it was ours last August.
You win today?
Until now. We never win in this country. Never!
Who for the last year has covered all the repercussions of the explosion here in Beirut. Taimur, thank you for coming on France 24 today. The anger in that report is palpable. It's clear that people worry that justice may not come. From your reporting, are they right to worry that that might not happen?
I think that's certainly the case. I mean, there are many things that are surreal 1 year on from this explosion in terms of the investigation. I mean, in terms of just where we're standing now, if you look back and sort of look at the silos and the scale of the destruction here. And what's so hurtful for so many families is that a year on, the process, the investigation has just been fought tooth and nail at every turn. You have politicians who are trying to fight this investigation. They're holding on to this set of special privileges, this set of immunities, and yes, I mean the families of the victims and the survivors are extremely worried that justice will be buried.
Well, let's talk about that question of immunity. There have been calls for the former finance minister and the former interior minister to have their immunities lifted. Do we know what their roles may have been?
There was a large report released by Human Rights Watch yesterday that really lays out in detail the responsibilities of various state administrations, from the Public Works Ministry, which oversees the port, the Finance Ministry, which oversees custom. We now know that the Finance Minister was made aware of the presence of this explosive material, and according to Human Rights Watch, didn't take the steps necessary. This goes up to the highest echelons of the Lebanese state. The Prime Minister, the President, a host of security officials, the head of general security, the head of the army, everybody knew. And what's becoming increasingly clear is that nobody did what was needed to be done.
And what's also clear, we're understanding now, is the level of dysfunction and corruption at the port. I think I'm correct in understanding that pretty much all political parties have a degree of stake in what happens there. Speak to us a bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So what happened is, after the Lebanese civil war, you basically had the militias going into government. They took off their fatigues, they put on suits and ties, and the port was actually one of the first sort of, let's say, honeypots that they came to after the war. The port is still to this day run by a so-called temporary committee that was set up in the aftermath of the civil war, and it was supposed to only exist for a few years. That committee has a member of every political party on it, and basically is a sort of, in a way, a system of taking money and funneling it into the pockets of politicians rather than state coffers. And we know that Lebanon has a serious problem with its finances now. I mean, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars in a hole in the financial system. And so a lot of people kind of point to the port as Ali Baba's cave, the cave of Ali Baba and the 40 thieves. And so it was a surprise to nobody that this happened at the port.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what perhaps can be done now. There are calls internationally for sanctions on various Lebanese leaders for potentially for corruption and for what happened at the port. Do you think that is likely to have a big impact on the way that dysfunction operates here?
It's certainly been an interesting thing to see. You know, Lebanese politicians historically have international patrons. France has historically been very close to some people in the country, Iran, Saudi Arabia. What we've seen over the past 2 years is a sort of turn in those relations, and increasingly the rhetoric, at least from the European Union, is one of, less of a carrot and more of a stick. The carrot is still there, but Lebanese politicians simply haven't done what they need to do to get it. Simple reforms, reform the electricity sector, stop corruption. They haven't been able to do it. And so yes, in July we saw the EU take the decision, just about a week ago, take the decision to create a sanctions regime for Lebanon. That's a big step, for politicians who were the darlings of the West in many ways to now be facing sanctions. Although we still have to see whether that's going to happen. It's a political decision. It's a decision that's made in Brussels, and it is subject to change. The French, for example, have put government formation as one of the conditions for this, which is a little bit of a weird one, because then if you form a government, you remove sanctions. What are the standards for that? So there are many questions, and people do fear that the international community have let the Lebanese people down before. They have in the past propped up the system with billions of dollars of aid. Now is a moment of accountability, both locally and internationally, but we have to see where that's going to go.
Yeah, and you touched on that challenge of forming a new government. It's worth reminding our viewers that the former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri spent nearly 10 months trying to form a government. He eventually, a couple of weeks ago, said actually he was unable to do so. So Lebanon has a caretaker government in place. Now, recently, another former Prime Minister, Najib Miati, was nominated to try and form a new government. Do you think he'll be able to do that soon? And if so, what can he do to try and rectify some of these huge systemic issues we're talking about?
Right. I mean, Lebanon hasn't had a government for almost a year now. They resigned in the aftermath of the blast. In the time since, we've gone through 2 prime minister designates, and now we have the 3rd. He's a billionaire, former prime minister. He's Lebanon's 1st or 2nd richest man. There are serious questions about whether a man who is enmeshed in business and banking interests and pretty much is sort of an emblem of the political class can take the kinds of steps that people increasingly want. You know, the average Lebanese person looks at this and says, you have a person who represents the people who caused an economic crisis, who led corruption, and who, yes, they blame for exploding the port behind us, which was sort of a symbol of this corruption. And they're kind of going, this is the person who's going to be saving us. This is our savior. It's really unclear. And later today, the streets here are going to be filled with, we expect, thousands of people. And they're demanding a simple thing. They're demanding justice. Yeah. And this is a turn that we've seen in sort of the past year. Before there were protests, people were asking for electricity. They were asking for economic rights. The slogan that came up after the blast was justice for the victims and revenge from the regime. And people are increasingly angry. People, more than reforming the system, actually want to rip it apart and start again because this hasn't worked for them.
Yeah, and we remember back in 2019, there were also huge protests in Lebanon. At that time, it was dubbed the Thawra, the revolution here in Lebanon. Do you think, Taimur, we're close to that point again? Mass protests in the street every day, sit-ins in the heart of Beirut as people demand really an end to this political system.
So those protests began on October 17th, 2019. For many, August 4th, the day of the blast, is a new October 17th. What the families of victims will say is that day people were really united in their suffering. It seems like in the time since, everyone in Lebanon has been sort of part of this endless series of intertwined sorrows. And what the families of victims will say is that this has in fact created a new identity in the country, an identity of the victim, an identity that crosses sectarian boundaries, an identity that crosses all kinds of barriers. And so there is definitely a hope that, in a country with way too many anniversaries, with way too many remembrances of explosions, of assassinations, of the civil war, that this anniversary will be different, that this will be the start of something new. And they are hoping for justice, which is quite a simple thing, but quite a powerful thing, and really has the ability to, I think, change the country in many ways. And there's a sense among the families of victims that politicians know this, and ceding a little bit of ground, giving an inch here, could allow them to take a mile.
All right, Taimur Azari, I want to thank you very much indeed for your time coming on France 24 today. Thank you as well for watching this special programme from Beirut. We're going to have more coverage for you throughout the day. Those protests we've been talking about, we'll be bringing you reporting live from there. For now, though, back to our teams in Paris.